Hi, my name is Hari Dilip Kumar, and I am here with the DAV Data4SDG Thought Leaders interview series. So today I'm thrilled to be chatting with Gagan Reddy, who is a data entrepreneur and nature-based solutions expert working on the climate and biodiversity crisis. He's the founder CEO of Cittamap in the Netherlands, which applies AI towards creating climate neutral cities and the future of urban infrastructure. He's also part of the Global Shapers and the Climate Reality Leader Core, and he has a pulse on social issues while taking a market-based approach for transformative change. So it's a great pleasure to be talking to you, Gagan. So let's start at the beginning. So let's talk about your company, which you co-founded, Cittamap in the Netherlands. So tell us, what is the vision which you have towards your company? What is the thing which you would like to achieve, for Netherlands and for the world? And what do you see yourself doing in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Sure. So I started Cittamap about 2.5 years ago, basically starting with it being a data company, right? Yeah. I saw this opportunity that there's a lot of data in the world and we need to use it to make better decisions. And over the course of a year, it sort of evolved into the climate angle, right? The climate and the biodiversity angle, where we want to make cities more resilient, more sustainable, right? We want to create safe urban environments because the impending threat of the climate risks is becoming more and more evident. So in simply put, we just want to make safe living urban environments. And we want to use data to enable that transformation.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So when you talk about safe, you're actually thinking about safe from the 10, 20, 30-year perspective, as well as the, more shorter term, because I believe the climate crisis will start showing up in terms of risks a little, maybe on the longer scale. Can you talk about, why the focus on cities when you talk about climate risk or building safety or resilience, for example? Do you think that cities are disproportionately important when it comes to building resilience for the future?
Definitely. So the global trend of urbanization is projected to see that about 2/3 of humanity will live in cities by 2050.
Yeah.
Right now, about half of us live in cities.
Yeah.
So cities are also special places because they occupy only like 2% of the landmass on the planet, but emit more than 80% of the CO2. And all of our consumption happens in cities. So for any action to take place, cities are ground zero. But as we were speaking about the climate risks, they're not upcoming, they're already here.
I see.
And they're only projected to get worse. So the place where people live is where we need to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. So I saw cities as like the ground zero for taking any kind of action.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because what you're saying is that like 80% of our consumption and GHG emissions and so on and so forth. So mitigation is linked to cities, but you're also saying vulnerability adaptation is also, you have to focus on cities because of like the masses of populations which are there. So really interesting. So since you're active in the Netherlands and the European space, can you talk about how, your approach to smart cities differs or compares, let's say, to the Indian approach to smart cities? Like we call it the smart cities approach, right? To build the future vision of cities. Do you have something like that in the Netherlands as well? And how do you contrast or compare the approaches and how they work?
Right. So let's start with semantics. Right?
Yeah.
So last 20 years, the smart cities has been a very popular term.
Yeah.
Then we go into sustainable cities. We're now coming to resilient cities, and there's a whole host of other things like inclusive, green, and all these other topics out there.
Yeah.
And every word has its own camp. Right?
Yeah.
So, and it's sort of like different people are gathering to solve similar issues.
Yeah.
And with the Netherlands, because there's the EU,
yeah.
there's actually like a central government. Let's draw some parallels there with the Indian system.
Yeah.
Where each state has its own culture, has its own autonomy. It's sort of very similar to Europe, where different countries have different languages and cultures.
Yeah.
And I think those two are very similar in terms of approaches.
Yeah.
And in general, the smart cities approach is let's create a plan and let's create projects. And now we can call ourselves smart.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like let's install an autonomous vehicle system, which is innovative for the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But it is only a pilot project.
Yeah.
And compare that to India, where just setting up a metro is innovative and smart, and so. But compared to Europe, Budapest has had metro for the last 100 years. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So in terms of project implementations, there's some variation.
Yeah.
End of the day, it's implementing projects and saying and trying to classify yourself as smart.
Okay. So this is pretty interesting. So you're saying that the federated structure of the governance of the European Union means that there's already a vision in place for future cities of the EU, and there may be some differences in what is considered like innovation or movement towards the future in the Netherlands and in India. Can you talk also about what are the desired outcomes of these kinds of approaches? You say that there are people from lots of different camps, and I've also met some of them. So I've met some people who, when you start talking about the future of urban living here in India, start with flying cars. But then I've also met some other people who start with the climate crisis. And I sometimes feel they don't talk to each other enough and understand each other enough. When it comes to the starting point for the future vision of cities and urban living in the Netherlands, does it start from the vision of flying cars, or does it start from the vision of the impending ecological and climate catastrophes? Especially since we've already seen that from the Netherlands or from the Scandinavian countries, they are more proactive in some sense from the environmental perspective.
Yes, I think it's a mix of both.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who are dreamers and some people who are more grounded. Mm-hmm. And I think there should be a combination of these different viewpoints, right? Yeah. You need future forward thinking flying taxis, as opposed to, hey, we need to strengthen this dike right now because that's a more immediate threat.
Yeah.
I think that's where different camps can actually benefit from each other.
Yeah.
But as you said, there has to be more interdisciplinary talk and cross-team collaboration.
Yeah.
Because cities are complex. There are so many aspects of a city. And if we try to mimic nature to come into cities, nature is also an extremely complex system.
Yeah.
We don't know half of it.
Yeah.
That's an overstatement, but we want to try to mimic how natural systems work, how they're more circular, how they're more ecologically bound.
Yeah.
And we want to bring those principles to cities. So at the end of the day, complexity is just the game, and we need to figure out different pathways.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, because it's like the blind man and the elephant, right? Like one person will think it's it's about one thing, another person will think about another thing. But it's really interesting that you mentioned circularity and circular flows and natural flows. In natural ecosystems are circular, and how to bring some of this material and energy flow, I suppose, to the future of urban living. So obviously you're doing something with circular economy as well, and enabling this using data, of course, which is why we're talking on a Data4SDG interview. So, being a business, right, you have to like deal with the complexity in chunks. So you can't fulfill everybody's needs all at once, right? So you have to zero in on a market segment for whom you're creating some value, right? Otherwise you might go out of business. So can you tell us in your ecosystem in the Netherlands, who your journey in terms of like who you want to create value for, or who you are trying to create value for, and how you've evolved in this process? Because I believe, like a business like yours might have also pivoted sometimes. So can you share some of that experience?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah.
I think this has been an interesting journey for myself. I started off with the government, in a government program that is trying to be innovative.
Yeah.
And I also have an affinity to government. I guess inspired my father and my grandfather, who were in service as well, right? So I always had that affinity, and I started working with them. And we did do a project together, but there are some practical barriers to working with the government if you're a young startup, right?
Yeah.
So I went from building a product based off of a solution, identifying that this market segment doesn't work to the government, and then move to the built environment sector, which is real estate structure.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that your initial vision, you knew you wanted to do something with cities, and then you started with government as the most powerful stakeholder. and you felt that government wasn't a good customer for what you wanted to be doing, and then you got into what you're calling the built environment, right? Um, but does this mean that you won't work with government going ahead in the future, or will you do it when conditions become more favorable for you? That's my first question. And my second question would be, can you expand a little bit on what you mean by built environment? Because we're used to words like real estate or infrastructure. And so what do you mean by built environment, and how do you sort of create the future of built environment? So these are my questions.
Right. So firstly, definitely we will go back to working with the government.
Yeah.
They're a key stakeholder in building future cities.
Okay.
Secondly, the market segments, when we talk about real estate, that is one different market segment.
Yeah.
And infrastructure is a different market segment.
I see.
Now, when I started out, I saw real estate as infrastructure as well, because
Okay.
it's housing.
Okay.
Right. But when you go to market, these are completely different sectors.
Yeah.
Right? Real estate is a little bit more, how do I put it delicately, made up.
Yeah.
We're assigning a certain value to things.
Yeah.
And infrastructure is the nitty-gritty of actually getting it done.
Yeah.
Right? So I sort of combine them into the built environment, which is anything that we are transforming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, now majority of the world has been transformed in some way or the other.
Yeah.
But when we speak about an urban built environment, that is speaking about a city.
I see. Okay, so what you're doing must be plugging into the urban infrastructure or cities SDG, as well as maybe responsible production and consumption, so on and so forth. So let's take your market segment of like built environment slash I don't know, we can't call it real estate, but what real estate has become, right? So can you one of the things which we were talking about, which was like super interesting, was how you are using like data and advanced analytics and artificial intelligence to create value in the workflows of people from these private enterprises, these big corporations perhaps, who are using who are designing built environment, right, and doing things like this. Can you share some of that, as well as the dynamics of the marketplace you're playing in? How is it that you're disrupting the marketplace using the the kinds of technologies you are? And feel free to get as technical as possible. We have an avid audience of data scientists and students and so on and so forth, who really want to know how to apply the skills of data science. So feel free to answer technically if you feel the need.
Sure. Okay. So a couple of things there. So let's start with SDGs actually.
Yeah.
SDGs 11 is for sustainable cities and communities.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the custodian agency for this is the UN Habitat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have a classification of what is a living space for humans.
Yeah.
And I also see the SDG 11 as the center point of achieving a lot of the other SDGs.
Right? Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, it's like a keystone SDG, right?
Yeah, because think of poverty, hunger, health, everything happens majority in cities.
Yeah.
So that is a very important one. And when we talk about how it relates to the natural environment, there's SDG 13 with climate action, 14 and 15, which is dealing with life on land and below water.
Yeah.
So it links a lot of the different SDGs. So that way it is a keystone SDG, as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Secondly, going into market.
Yeah.
Right? Now, SDG awareness is quite low in general. In the world, about 5% of the people know it. And with the market itself, a really advanced or a big corporate company that's doing infrastructure projects will write a yearly sustainability report.
Yeah.
That is their idea of sustainability.
Right. A yearly report, right? Yeah.
A yearly report. And that's where they hire an SDG consultant to say, okay, this is how it links to the work that you've done.
Yeah.
And lastly, coming into the actual workflows, how we're using data to change it is traditionally the construction sector, or I'm throwing a lot of different market terms, and that's why the thing is so split up, is the least digitized sectors out there. Right? They are still operating in an age-old model.
Yeah.
And a simple example of a group of project developers sitting around the table and evaluating opportunity is most of the times the decision goes based on experience.
Yeah.
And who has the loudest voice.
Okay.
You know, and just to tie that to, for example, gender equality.
Yeah.
A project developer once mentioned that I need this data to back my point up. Like I make a point in a meeting, but I'm unable to back it up with the right data. So the data is making the difference between them choosing an innovative and future pathway versus sticking to, okay, we've done this for 20 years, 30 years. Let's just do the
same. Fascinating. Yeah.
So, and that's where data is really making a difference. And coming to the practicalities of using this information is, everybody's saying we need to be data driven, especially for the last years, but nobody knows what that means.
Okay.
There is a huge misconception of what it means to be data driven.
Yeah.
Is that it's something that we need to become.
Yeah.
At the moment, everybody is data driven. You make your decisions based on the information that you have.
Yeah.
Right? So, and there's a misconception of it being related to software engineering.
Yeah.
Like, to give you 3 weeks and a sprint time, and you need to create this outcome.
That's fascinating, Gagan. So, you're basically saying a lot of things here. First of all, that the SDGs themselves, there's little awareness. That might be at the country scale, the SDGs, but in companies also, the decision making is based on experience and business as usual conventions. And if you want new voices, they need data to support themselves. And this data is actually available. So you were telling us about how the data is available, but it's not being harnessed, or the insights are not being created. So everybody has data, but it's not being utilized in the right way to make the right, evidence-based decisions, right? So can you talk about that, that in-between step where, you go from data to like one level higher than data, right? Where you use it to present a case or something like this. Is this something which you're trying to build more automation in, or is it something where you're like identifying use cases and building more automation for the kinds of decision-making processes which you're supporting? Is this what you're trying to say?
Yes. So essentially identifying the value of data. So you go from raw data or something that's analyzed to using it for internal decision making, and then moving on to actually implementing on customer level, right?
Yeah.
So if people realize data is an asset, that's something that monetization can happen if you develop it sufficiently.
Yeah.
That completely changes the game from, hey, we're spending X amount of money on IT infrastructure, just for storage of all the information that we're creating, to let's spend more IT budget on hiring people and buying data and analyzing it, right? So that mindset change is slowly happening. So if we go try to sell something, we have to look at what their IT budget is, because we are trying to say this ties into your IT infrastructure, which they sort of understand right now. So that way, I think we're changing a little bit with how can we implement it in the workflow. And that's where user-centric development comes into play. You have to use a lot of design thinking methods.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's so fascinating. Yeah. I mean, basically you're saying that what was thought of as an IT investment suddenly becomes a strategic and operational sort of investment, right? So that we can make better decisions faster. And, it's just a complete shift in mindset. So I'm curious because a lot of these, like the process of supporting better decision making, right? I mean, how do you pitch this? Is it that, how do you pitch it in terms of something which creates tangible value? Is it that you say that you have to hire less consultants, or, we can make this process faster for you? Or, so you say that you were saying that you use a lot of design thinking for, customer use cases. Can you talk about who are the kinds of stakeholders with whom you do design thinking? And do you pitch directly to them, or, do you pitch overall to the company and, they decide?
Right.
Yeah.
So initially we started out reaching to sustainability and resilience teams in these infrastructure companies.
Yeah.
And one thing realized that these teams are also sort of, how do you put it, placeholder projects, right? They were projects and showcasing that, hey, we also have this innovative thing, but it was not part of mainstream decision making. So for us to actually sell it to the company, we had to reach the decision maker on a larger scale, right?
There you go. Yeah.
this small team had maybe some budget and they could pay us a little bit to sort of engage with us. Whose also motive was, hey, we need to convince our overlords that what you're providing actually makes sense on the larger scale. So that way, some of the challenges that I saw in the last 2 years, that was clear. And I also went from a pull market, which was just providing data on what they were currently looking at, to saying, hey, we're looking at sustainability data, which is a push market, which they did not understand. So that was a strategic move, which sort of hindered the growth of the company in the short term. But I saw it necessary to position ourselves well for 5 years, or 20 years.
That's fascinating. I mean, so where it's so interesting. So you had to convince different stakeholders and the stakeholders of your actual users. And what you're also hinting at is that it's not a completely mature market where you are right now, because people, people pay for the perception of value, right? And although and perhaps some people who have supported you also know the value of what you're creating, people will pay the cost of your solution only if they perceive that. So would you say that in the Netherlands, you need a few more years to become mature in terms of an ecosystem which supports this kind of, data-based and AI-based workflows for, the kind of sustainable development goals which you're working on? So do you think it needs a couple more years, or is it more than that? And my second question would be, also, when you compare the maturity of the Netherlands ecosystem, how do you see it with respect to India? Because we've had some exciting policy changes being announced in terms of, for example, mapping data, accessible to Indian companies to work with is a recent announcement. So how do you contrast the maturity of ecosystems where you are right now, which I'm picking up that not everybody is thinking the same way you are or the sustainability teams are, and here in India?
So two topics there. One is the technology itself, and the second is the use case. In terms of the technology, let's speak about geospatial technology and satellite data, which is our specialization. The Netherlands is one of the best countries in the world, next to Australia, Canada, with geospatial frameworks. The EU also has a common spatial policy for the last 8 years, where because geospatial data is admin boundary agnostic, data goes across. So they want a common framework to upload and share information. So that way, Netherlands is really far ahead. The Indian policy, that is amazing news that came out 2 days ago, where we have certain guidelines on how do we deal with geospatial data, particularly geospatial data. And of course, the whole policy is focused on boosting economy and self-reliance, which are buzzwords for the Indian system. One key thing I'd like to mention there is co-creation. Is everybody will be able to create data. So data scientists out there can create a data set, and this should be easy for everybody to use, for the government to use, and this interchange in a collaborative nature, that is really progressive, I would say. Now coming to the sector itself, when we talk about climate and cities and biodiversity, Netherlands is, or the EU itself is a little ahead there, because last year there was a policy there, which is called the European Climate Law, where all the member states are bound legally to become climate neutral by 2050, which means zero carbon emissions, decoupling economy with consumption, and protection of nature. So in that sense, they're a bit ahead. And I would say the COP26 that is coming up in November will be a key role, because the EU with now the UK separated, but the EU will play a key role there because they have policy in place. They're going to be setting the guidelines as a reference point. So the conversation is moving much faster now post-COVID. And the nature-based solutions becoming a key pillar of COP26. Right? Nature-based solutions is a very young topic. It's only about 20 years old. And there is very little research. It's proliferating more and more. But because they made it a main pillar, now every single politician is talking about nature-based solutions, right? at the expense of it becoming a buzzword, at least more people are becoming aware of what it is.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So what I'm hearing is that in terms of like a technological and business engagement aspect, the Indian ecosystem is rapidly taking strides, making this data available and encouraging engagement and creating value out of it. But maybe in terms of the societal imperatives of decarbonization and so on and so forth, the EO is a little ahead in the game. And it's really interesting that you are also mentioning nature-based solutions, because of course I know that you also work on nature-based solutions yourself, apart from Cittamap in a different avatar, let's say. But extremely interesting to see this contrast, and I think more conversations between these worlds of climate change and climate crisis and sustainability, and the world of, wow, this is technology, this is new technology we've never seen before, what can we do with it, with these thinking machines. So we need more conversations so that we sort of apply technology wisely, let's say, and recognize what the imperatives are. So I guess we're running out of time now, Gagan, but it's been such a pleasure to talk to you and to see the world through your eyes, and to understand the kinds of things which you're doing, why you're doing them, and how you see things in terms of the future. So I think our last question as we leave should be addressed to you is, if you could have any three things, right, like wishes or something like this, which will make your work easier towards achieving your vision and mission, what would they be? And I would also say, just be mindful that we have students, entrepreneurs, data scientists, companies, maybe even some government people who will be watching these interviews. So what are your three wishes now that we understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and where you see yourself going? So what are your three wishes which you want to put out there?
Definitely. So starting with the basics, right? Fundamentally, we need to realize that our economy is embedded in nature.
Yeah.
We are a nature-based economy.
Yeah.
So every single industry out there, every single job out there entails some connection with nature. And that clarity should be more and more evident. The second is something to do with the camp mentality that I was mentioning before.
Yeah.
Is semantics are an important thing. So sustainability has become a fad word for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Maybe look at decarbonization as a new buzzword,
yeah.
hopefully. So not get too bogged down by it, just to understand that people are on the same boat.
Yeah.
And lastly is the whole thing about data-driven mentalities and the mindset shift, right?
Yeah.
We are already data-driven, so it's not something so new. We just need to move towards the fact that a lot more is available, and we need to engage with that core paradigm.
Wow. So there you have it, from a true thought leader. This is me, Hari Dilip Kumar, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Gagan Reddy of Cittamap for the DAV Data Solutions Data4SDG Thought Leaders interview series. So this was a great pleasure for me, and I look forward to seeing you all again. So bye, Gagan. Great to talk to you today.
Thank you.